President Trump is pushing for changes at the Smithsonian Institute, even meeting with the Smithsonian's chief, as critics say it's become so motivated by ideology that it bears no resemblance to the institution it once was, but instead paints the U.S. in a negative light. And you're paying for it. Joining us this morning to discuss is the Deputy Public Policy Editor for OpenTheBooks.com, Rachel O'Brien. Good morning to you, Rachel. Great to see you on this Friday.
Good morning.
Yesterday, the top executive of the Smithsonian did meet with the president at the White House as the administration right now looks to try to review content and some of the exhibits at the institution there. There's 21 museums, by the way, 14 research and education centers. Tell us about some of the ideologically driven exhibits the museums have that you have found.
Yeah, this is a huge institution that has a big impact on the country and the world. And so many of the exhibits either depict the American founding or culture negatively, describing them as being rooted in colonialism or portraying left-wing causes as good and virtuous, like commemorating illegal border crossings and celebrating President Biden's Title IX changes that allow biological men to compete in women's sports. You were just talking about this. So, for instance, at the National Museum of American History, there's an Entertainment Nation exhibit. So, you would expect to learn about the impressive history of American popular culture, but instead you're taught things like 19th century circuses expressed the colonial impulse to claim domination over the world. The Phoenix Suns basketball team, they staged an on-court protest in solidarity with the Latinx community over immigration laws, they called it. And they praise Anthony Fauci as an infectious disease superstar without mentioning any of the criticism of his handling of the pandemic. So, choosing these topics obviously is choosing to rewrite history in many cases, ignoring components of stories that they're telling. So, there was a pandemic-related exhibit at the Museum of Natural History that ran through 2021. One of the exhibit sponsors was now the infamous EcoHealth Alliance. They're a nonprofit. They were banned from getting federal grants this year. They have failed to disclose their risky gain-of-function research that they were funding in China in the years leading up to the pandemic. And they, in the exhibit, promote the theory that the COVID-19 originated, as an animal-to-human event, not from a lab leak. And so I could go on and on.
There's even a curator I read at the museum that admits that she cannot be objective, and she earns $125,000 a year there. How much taxpayer dollars is the Smithsonian Museums getting?
Yeah, so they get from for the fiscal year 2025 budget, Congress gave the Smithsonian about $1.1 billion. And that's 2/3 of their budget. That's coming from taxpayers. There are entire exhibits that cost tens of millions of dollars. That Entertainment Nation exhibit I was just talking about, wow, that alone cost $18 million. And so, that federal funding is also supercharged by donations from corporate and nonprofit donors, which can cause obvious conflicts of interest if public messages are hijacked for their private purposes.
What has the Trump administration done to change this?
Right, so you mentioned a bit of it. The White House met with that Smithsonian head yesterday. The White House announced this month that they are reforming the institution. They're starting with the 8 major museums in D.C. The president signed an executive order in the spring taking aim at these museums for curating exhibits, that he said twist and disparage American history. So they're going to be looking at the content that they're putting forward. They're assessing the tone, the historical framing, and the White House is going to create narrative standards. They're going to be guidelines that the Smithsonian is going to have to follow for when they're putting together these exhibits. And so you have to remember, this is supposed to be a nonpartisan entity with an educational mission. And so it has become a tool in an ideological battle. And so these materials do push a viewpoint that American values are inherently harmful and oppressive, instead of being a country that advances liberty and prosperity. And so we're all for free speech. And acknowledging every bit of our history, but we should leave ideological takes to private institutions. Taxpayers should be funding exhibits, should not be funding exhibits that deepen social divides
rewrite
or
history.
foster a sense of national shame.
That's right. That's right. Deputy Public Policy Editor at openthebooks.com, Rachel O'Brien. We appreciate you sharing this with us. Thanks for joining us. Hope you have a great weekend.
You too. Thanks for having me, Jan.
Of course.